So today we are going to reflect on AEW All In from Wembley now that it is done and dusted. All of the discourse, all of the conversation around it in the build-up is finally over. I am joined with Steve. I would say you are the biggest wrestling fan I know, but also you go to shows regularly, which I feel like is important for this because I haven't been to a wrestling show in a long time. So I have this experience and then not experience of other things. So I feel like there'll be some stuff that you might differ to me on, or stuff I'm sure we'll agree on a bunch of stuff as well. The objective of this, I suppose, is to talk about whether it lived up to expectations, because that's been the huge discourse ever since it was announced. Like, can it possibly live up to Wembley Stadium and the biggest wrestling show of all time and all of this stuff? Because if anyone has ever heard me and you talk about fight cards, man, if we went play by play, we'd be here for hours. So I feel like it's the only way we can do this.
Yeah, we could probably spend a good few minutes going on each match. So I think, this is probably the best way to do it.
And also, there was some fantastic pro wrestling, but I love nonsense in wrestling, and I feel like me and you could probably spend a good 20 minutes just talking about Jeff Jarrett. So which nobody needs to hear that, but it happened. But I don't know if did that get posted on social media or anywhere?
So it was shown on the poster on the pre-show.
Okay.
So they promoted obviously the 0 hour starting at 5, and then literally like in the moment, seemingly it was like, oh, we're starting at 4.
Right. Yeah, I didn't see this anywhere.
Yeah, I never saw them announce that. And then I'm getting to my seat and like, oh, Powerhouse Hobbs is in the ring and it's 4:30. Like, what are we doing here? But yeah.
I had the same thing. I was like, okay, we've got loads of time on our hands. So cool.
Yeah.
And then I started going to my seat and I was like, wait, is that Miro? What's happening? Like, what's going on here?
Yeah.
And then the weirdest thing is that the Ring of Honor tag titles match started earlier than 5. It's just like,
was it?
Oh, maybe it was right around there, but I assumed there would be like,
because they did the contract signing and then they did the Jeff Jarrett and Grado thing, and then they went into the matches. So I think it was a couple minutes after 5.
Yeah, we can't spend all the time on this, but I did not expect when Big Show mentioned being at All In that he would actually be there and do something. Like that was a surprise. But
it's like obviously he did a lot of the promo, and he's a great guy. They have to do promo, but he doesn't seem to do a lot else for AEW at the minute. But it was fine. They got Grado on the show, too cheap to pay for Madonna apparently, and a Go-Go was there too. Which was like, it's cool for me because he's from the same part of the country as I am, but I don't think a lot of people really noticed him, if I'm honest.
No, I honestly didn't, like, until I caught a close-up view. I honestly didn't realize he was the third person that was with them. Like, I don't know if anyone near me did either, because it seemed like people were excited to see Big Show and Grado, and then it was like, oh, there's another guy.
Yeah, the pre-show. We were talking about the pre-show. The most random panel ever. Renee.
I didn't even know. I haven't seen this.
Oh no, they were in like one of the boxes that they would use for like when there's a football game on. That Renee, the Big Show, Anthony Ogogo, and Kip Sabian. That was like the pre-show panel. Poor Kip Sabian for not getting a moment in the ring, right?
Yeah, I thought that. I feel like they probably could have found a spot on that pre-show.
Yeah, I mean, I'm surprised they didn't do a battle royal just to get as many guys on as they wanted. But
yeah. Before we get into speaking about matches specifically, I guess, the whole discourse and the build-up about expectations, and a lot of people were talking for ages about the card not coming together until late on, which I feel like is more of an issue if you don't watch AEW that regularly, because I just felt it was standard AEW, and I haven't really been too disappointed by the late notice booking of their pay-per-views in the past. So I personally wasn't that worried about the fact that it did seem a little bit late to announce matches, and they were shifting tickets without doing it. So I didn't really buy into that.
I thought it was about standard for pay-per-view. It's not often you're getting matches announced for pay-per-view more than 3 weeks in advance, and that's about what it was for the first couple of matches, I think. So this week's show is a bit of a different story, obviously, when they've had this show in the way. But that's a whole other topic.
Yeah. I guess what were your expectations going in then? Like, did you think that it could live up in your own estimations and in what the general public seemed to be saying about it?
Well, obviously, like 80,000 people, Wembley Stadium. It's a high bar, right? And then you add on the fact that there's this show the week after, so I kind of felt like, maybe it's not going to be like the blowing off all the storylines, like you say, like you'd see at WrestleMania, like we saw with the Takeshita match. I think is a prime example of that, setting up the 6-man great party match for the crowd, but then the objective of that match was to set up the match for next week. And there's that in moments. I think the purpose of the show really was just a celebration. Like, it's a first for AEW, 80,000 people. I mean, it's the biggest night in the history of the company, bar none. So
yeah,
I think
you mentioned
you've got the guys on the show. You've got the great Adam Cole MJF storyline, which played into this show. So, I mean, I think there was enough there, and it's probably about what I was expecting.
Yeah, same. You mentioned then about how there was probably, I think when it initially got announced, the idea that it would be a big like WrestleMania style blow off all of these feuds and things like that, some surprises, all those kind of things that you would expect with like one of the big AEW shows. And then I think when it got closer, it became a bit more of a reality that like All Out is a really big deal for them, and it is the week after, so they can't afford to blow everything off and then just start from scratch with All Out, which I think is easy to forget for especially for UK fans, because we're like, but this is the biggest event of the year, which it is in some ways, but
I think you see that by I think we only had 3 or 4 singles matches on the show.
Yeah,
I think that kind of shows what this show was. It was a party show. It was getting people on the card. It was having a big occasion in front of 80,000 people. But if you're looking for feuds to be blown off, you're probably not going to get that here. Next year, people have seen a show like this, so jumping ahead, obviously, they might have to go in that direction a bit more next year. It'd be interesting to see how things play out.
Yeah. I suppose we can touch on this now. Actually, that was one of the things that I was maybe like, I not necessarily expected it to happen, but I was a little bit disappointed to see that some of the singles match choices versus what people wanted to see was a little bit odd in some places. But honestly, after sitting through the whole show, I feel like we got a decent, like, I wasn't unsatisfied with how many quality singles matches we got and the times they went for. Like, it was quite a good balance, especially for again, this is something that I suppose you can speak to more from going to a lot smaller shows, but also, have you gone to both Money in the Bank and Clash at the Castle?
Yeah,
I went to Money in the Bank.
I went to both of those shows and all in.
Yeah, like I get the disappointment in not seeing some of those singles matches that people went to see, but when you have a crowd that big, it's a thin line, and I feel like they did a fairly good job of like keeping people invested throughout the whole show, which with a crowd that big is not easy.
I feel like overall of the 3 shows, this one felt the biggest, just in terms of like the production, just the vibe going in. Clash at the Castle, if that show was at Wembley, it might have been different, who knows, but obviously they went with Cardiff. So in terms of the singles matches, I think Kenny is the one that obviously people will point to, Kenny not having a singles match on the show. But I mean, if you want to get Ibushi on the card, a lot of the fans may not be as familiar with Ibushi, so that's probably the best way to do it. And there's next year. Kenny can have a singles match next year.
Yeah.
Now we know that's next year.
Yeah. The other thing to speak about, I suppose, like pre the actual event, was the idea of whether it would feel like a WrestleMania week, because WrestleMania in the UK is like the big talking point for a lot of people, like especially when Money in the Bank came around. And I suppose you had a much better taste of this than me, because not only did I literally just come into London, watch the show, and then leave immediately after you were around it a bit more, but you also went to Rev Pro the day before, which did it feel at all like a little bit of an NXT takeover to a WrestleMania?
A little bit. Obviously, ROH Supercard of Honor. That's another comparison you can make.
Yeah.
It's getting there. There was a few shows about. I think now next year, obviously, with a year to prepare, I think next year you're only going to see more shows, and it's going to feel a bit more like a WrestleMania. But for April, the show got announced. It's now August. 4 or 5 months. It was there was a good atmosphere. There was a lot of shows going around. Retro was a really fun show. They got 4,000 people at their show, which I think at least doubled their highest attendance previously.
Damn.
So, and I went to Choco Pro on Saturday as well, which we're talking about nonsense. That's the most nonsensical wrestling you'll ever see, but it was the most fun I had all weekend. So it was a good weekend. Obviously on Friday we had the Fozzy concert as well, and there were a couple of things going on today as well. So it kind of had that feeling a little bit, but I think next year we've seen the success this year had, so it's only going to get bigger in terms of more shows popping up.
Yeah, I wonder if AEW will make more of an effort to do like just like fan events and stuff throughout either the week or the just the weekend even.
So they had the Box Park event, which they only sold tickets as an add-on to the actual purchase of the tickets all in. So the queues for that were insane. But
I walked past the queues like when I arrived at Wembley and was like,
no, I went past it on the Saturday as well, and the queues on the Saturday were insane too. And Saturday they did more. They did like meet and greets. They did Q&As on Saturday. But no, that looked packed. But I think next year, if they can do a proper fan fest, then find a bigger place for it, I think that's something they would definitely look to do. Obviously, in the future, one thing that was big for Tony Khan was the first event in the UK being Wembley Stadium. Now that hurdle's gone, so that gives the potential for maybe a Dynamite, a Collision leading up to the show as well next year. So all of these things are going to make the weekend feel bigger in future. But for the first time, it was a good start.
Yeah. All right. We'll just get into the matches. As I mentioned to you before we started recording, I feel like the idea of did it live up to expectations? I feel like a lot of the matches were like they didn't necessarily exceed my expectations, but they weren't worse than I thought they would be. And so there isn't a whole lot to talk about with some of them. For example, I don't know whether you disagree on this, but I'm going to assume not. Hook versus Jack Perry was the match I would thought it would be. I enjoyed the car related shenanigans at the start. I thought that added a little bit of something to it. But
the callback to Jack Perry diving headfirst into the car several weeks ago. Could have done without some of the things that came after that match, but I digress.
That did not exceed my expectations.
That you could say that was like nailed on the expectations knowing one of the parties.
Yeah, I'd say so. Obviously I've jumped ahead there because it was opened by MJF and Adam Cole versus Aussie Open for the Ring of Honor titles, which I feel like was one of the bigger talking points going in of like the idea of them opening and closing the show. And I know MJF seemed to take it, and Cole seemed to take it fairly like seriously, of the idea of whether that ruins the main event in any kind of way by having them already come out and put on a show. Maybe this is tied to the length of AEW shows, which is another thing people always complain about, how many matches, but it felt like such far apart bookends, and such a different vibe. Like it felt so fun, the opening tag match, and then by the time you got to the main event, it was like, okay, now this is like the serious match. Like, of course, there was sitcom wrestling galore at the end, but like it was like, okay, this is this is where the show ends. And so it felt to me different enough and spaced apart enough to where there was no like overlap. I was just as excited to see both match.
Oh yeah, I agree, 100%. Firstly, I think MJF and Cole and Aussie Open is just generally a good match. It wasn't that long of a match. It was only about 6-7 minutes, I think. But obviously they were saving themselves for the main event. A lot of this match was spent playing to the crowd, getting the crowd warmed up, getting the crowd chanting double clothesline, getting the crowd chanting kangaroo kick, getting the crowd chanting Aussie wankers, which I heard in my section. So I think the match did what it was there for. It got the tag team on the show because obviously the tag team is hot at the minute, as well as the program leading to the main event. So I think really this served the purpose. And I was a little surprised that they won. I thought Roddy was gonna come out in this one, and one thing led to another. They were gonna lose, but they won the belt. So it's interesting to see where they go from here after the main event.
I don't feel like this needs to be a conversation, but there's no way that they're going to appear on Ring of Honor.
No.
There's no chance.
No.
Like I know that it was a joke of MJF saying about, "Oh, you're going to make me wrestle on Rampage and stuff like that," but there's no way he's showing up on Ring of Honor. I mean, it would be cool, but it's just not going to happen.
I mean, you mentioned that I'm the biggest wrestling fan that right? That's what you said at the start of the show. I don't watch Ring of Honor.
and there are sometimes, Steve, where I see what you have stayed up to watch, and I'm like, you are a crazy person.
I watch MLW. I don't watch Ring of Honor.
that speaks volumes. The first proper opening match of the show, CM Punk and Samoa Joe. I don't know where your expectations are for this because I don't know where you stand with CM Punk, which is a big topic, or where you're at historically with CM Punk and Samoa Joe, because this was one of my most anticipated matches, and I thought it was pretty good. Not as good as it could have been, but I like when the card was coming together, I was like, oh, this isn't going to be the half-hour near full fest like that. They're saving that for the matches we'll get onto later, but it hit the spot without like blowing me away.
It obviously wasn't one of their early 2000s Ring of Honor matches. It wasn't even the collision match they did a few weeks ago, but it was different. I mean, I think it's unfair to compare. Yeah, they played to the crowd a lot in this match. That you could tell, especially Joe was having a lot of fun in this match. They did the John Cena spot, they did the Hulk Hogan spot. They obviously CM Punk got his Terry Funk tribute in there as well, which was cool. But I really enjoyed this match. This was one of my favorite matches on the show, I feel like. And like you mentioned, you don't know where I stand with CM Punk. CM Punk was like my favorite wrestler as a child, pretty much.
Okay, sweet. Yeah, me too. Okay.
Yeah. But obviously, Joe is the crowd favorite, I mean, it was pretty split, but that's what you'd expect. Punk got his blade job in there as well. So this was a fun match. I really enjoyed this.
Yeah, I feel like this was a really good spot for both guys right now to capitalize on this weird like 50-50 thing that Punk has with everyone, to put him in there with Joe, that like even if you prefer CM Punk, everyone loves Samoa Joe and everyone wants to see him wrestle Punk. So
it's a safe match, isn't it?
Yeah, for sure. It is such a no-brainer. You could put that on anywhere in the world and it's going to be like people are excited. So
yeah.
Moving on to the 6-man tag, which we've kind of mentioned already because people wanted to see Kenny in a solo match, and I feel like it became very obvious very early on that the plan was going to be him and Takeshita all out, and that was going to get set up by this. Pretty like you said, pretty fun match. I feel like there is always one of these 6-man tags on every AEW pay-per-view where it's like it just does what it needs to do, and it was fun. I think that given the reaction that Kenny got, he does need to be in a big important match on the next when they come back next year, because it felt Like, at least around me, it felt like everyone was like, "Oh my god, we're watching Kenny Omega wrestle at Wembley." Like, that was the huge
That's how
thing
I
of
felt.
this match. Yeah, that's how I felt as well. Like, as much as I was like, I love Kota, I love Hangman. I've been, me and you have had this conversation before. I've always been a bit 50-50 on Jay White and Bullet Club Gold, and in recent weeks
The
through
stuff they're doing
Collision,
now is
they've
fantastic.
the best stuff I've ever seen them do, and I loved Kestra as well. So it was like this can't go badly. Like, another no brainer.
I mean, it was a party match. Obviously, everyone got their big spots in. The crowd loved all six guys. But then, at the end of the day, it did what it was supposed to do, which was set up the match next week. So I think, other than having Kenny in a singles match, this went about as well as it could have done, and it was a great match, great moment for the crowd. Seeing Kenny Omega, Kota Ibushi wrestling in front of 80,000 people.
Yes,
Yeah,
it's wild. FTR and the Bucks, another one of my most anticipated matches. I would assume everyone would have that right near the tops of their lists. Even if it did seem like we might not get it for the last week or so, which was a bit of an unnervy time. But we did get it. I'm surprised, actually, just looking now at the times of these matches. I felt like this one went longer, but I think that's just because there was so much like drama towards the last quarter of it feeling like it was. I mean, FTR and Bucks matches, I always have that where the last few minutes is like chaotic, where you don't know which way it's going to go. So it was completely what I was expecting. I felt like I should have gone back and watched their other matches before this, because I can't remember them massively distinctively. So I don't know, like, if I was comparing it to the other two, it just felt like another solid FTR Bucks match with some really great moments, and just great tag team wrestling. Which I had the whole Kenny thing of being like, I'm watching FTR versus the Bucks with 80,000 people. Like, what is going on?
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I think this week sometime I'm gonna try and watch all three matches, like back to back to back, to try and see if I pick up on anything, if there's any callbacks there that people obviously missed yesterday. Because there's nothing that really stands out, but knowing those guys, I'm sure there were some callbacks. So I'm gonna try and watch all three matches back to back to really put the story together. And just it was one of the best matches of the show for me. There's I feel three matches I would say that about, which I'm still kind of flip-flopping about. So I'll watch them all and then decide which match I think was the best match on the show. But I mean, I feel like this one is probably at this point my favorite match on the show.
Okay, it's definitely in the top three for me.
Well, the three is it's that match, it's Will and Jericho, and the main event.
Yeah, I think those are the three. Like,
and you can maybe put Punk and Joe in there.
Yeah,
and I loved we'll come on to it in a minute, but I loved the coffin match as well.
we will get onto that.
Yeah. But no, just a phenomenal match, as you'd expect from those guys, and a little bit surprised by the outcome, especially as you mentioned, given recent events. But yeah, it's an interesting one.
I
great match.
I thought for sure that the Bucks would have won. Like, I think that I enjoyed the ending so much because of that, because I genuinely, it wasn't like I don't know who's going to win. I was like, the Bucks winning this. Like, even forget the week that we had just been through. It's the Bucks wrestling at All In. Like, I was like, there's no way they don't get that moment. But yeah, interesting to see what happens now.
I mean, this was one of, in my opinion, the biggest locks of the night for who was going to win, and then they didn't win. So
yeah, agreed.
And obviously they teased, they walked off on a handshake at the end. They're teasing something there.
Yeah. Stadium Stampede match. Yeah. I don't know where to start with this, because even the Stadium Stampedes or the Anarchy in the Arenas that I've really enjoyed, afterwards I go, that is one of the matches that happened Like I don't know where to begin with what was good about it and what was bad about it, because you guarantee there's going to be some fun spots, and then in between them you've just got some things happening here, there, and everywhere. I will say I enjoyed it watching it today back through the through the actual broadcast than I did watching it live, just because it felt like there was a little bit too much like waiting for the next spot to happen at points. But it was fun nonsense with those guys, and I will watch those guys do that all the time.
Well, especially like, I found in the arena, it was just impossible to keep track of what was going on.
Yeah,
and I heard people watching the broadcast say that as well. So, but yeah, I enjoy the format. I did think it was more of a stadium stampede than I kind of figured it would be. You know, they obviously went into one of the boxes at one point. Man like Doris, who is a British indie wrestler, was the guy who got thrown into the bar by Eddie Kingston. So yeah, it was fun. I enjoy the Stampede, the Anarchy in the Arena format. So I enjoyed this. Bit more violent than I was expecting for an 80,000 capacity Wembley Stadium show. I mean, I wasn't expecting the sticks in the head of John Moxley, but all in all, I enjoyed this. But it's definitely one that I want to go back and watch on the broadcast, like you did, to kind of piece everything together.
Yeah, that I think that was my issue with it in the moment. Was I was like, okay, there were some cool spots, but like, if you asked me to give like a play-by-play of what just happened, I have no idea. It was just it's difficult to follow, but that's like the whole appeal, I guess. At the same time, as you look over here and something else is happening, and that so it's not as much as an issue that I have with this match in particular. More just that format, I think, is just like it's fun, but also difficult to pull off for the whole match. And they did a fairly good job, which I feel like the other ones have all also done a pretty good job of balancing that of what could be a really messy match at points. But
yeah, this match went 21 minutes, which is maybe a little bit long.
I did feel like there was a little bit like there was just points where it felt like you were just waiting for people to get in the right positions.
Yeah. But I mean, that's not to say I didn't enjoy the match. I really liked the match.
Yeah, I did have fun watching it, especially when Penta got a second entrance as Penta Obscura. That was fantastic. Just for him to come out, go through a table, and then not be seen again.
Yeah,
brilliant.
But I mean, I feel like if you took a couple minutes off of this match and added them to the match after, which we'll come on to in a second, I think it would have been better.
Yeah, that a very good transition, because watching the Fatal 4-Way women's match in the moment, I thought, oh, that was a bit fast. And then when I watched it back earlier, I was like, that match is way too fast.
Yeah.
Like, to have 4 women in the title match and for it to only go, according to Wikipedia, 8 minutes and 50 seconds is crazy. I'm sure that the result got a fantastic pop from you as Norwich's finest picking up the belt.
Yeah, I don't know about that. But I mean, this is one of the matches I rewatched to see how that moment came across on TV for sure. I would have preferred Shida to have kept the belt. She's only just got out. I'm a big fan of Shida, but I mean, I'm not surprised that they went for this moment with Saraya in Wembley. Whole family there. But we mentioned the time. This felt a bit rushed to me. It felt like they tried to cram too much into the 8 minutes. They obviously did the stuff with Saraya's mum, also Saraya. And then they obviously did the breakup stuff. They had Ruby come out. It felt like they tried to squeeze a lot in. So, you know, if they stretched it out a couple minutes, even just a couple minutes, I think it would have been a better match.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I this was another one where I was like, Saraya's gonna win this. I was just surprised that it didn't get a little bit more time to build up the drama of would she be able to, it didn't ever feel like there was no point where I was like, she's not gonna win. Like, which
I mean,
it didn't make it as big a moment.
I mean, I assume she was, but coming in, there was a bit of doubt. when she walked out to Queen and with her family behind her, I was like, yeah, she's winning.
Yeah.
And they only paid for the Queen song once because they got fallen in reverse after the match, unluckily or unfortunately, I should say. And you're the music. I'm taking your thunder. You're the music guy here.
I don't feel like you said it all.
We'll come on to music in a minute. Don't you worry.
Oh, we can get straight onto music right now because I was like when Swerve got a walkout, I thought, oh, I wonder if that means they're not going to do anything funny for Sting and Darby, and then for Tony Khan,
yeah,
like,
you called it out.
For just for Wembley, I'm gonna pay Metallica. Like, I can't imagine how expensive that was. But I'm not complaining because I mean I am wearing the same shirt that I wore to Wembley, and so when Seek and Destroy hit, I was like, this is amazing. Like,
yeah.
I feel like I don't need to say anything about this match. I love every single pay-per-view where Sting and usually Darby have a silly match, and this was one of my favorite silly Sting matches I've seen in quite some time.
Yeah, my favorite moment of this match was where Sting, he tried to break the table, he didn't break the table, he went back up and just basically sat on Swerve Strickland to make sure he's breaking the goddamn table that time.
Oh,
I love
it's
this
amazing.
I love this match so much.
I watched it earlier and I forgot how many moments I was laughing at. Like the big shock twist in the match being Sting stopping the coffin from closing with the bat.
Yeah.
I will never forget that. Him pulling out the cricket bat. Just
that was good.
So much nonsense, and it was so much fun. I almost, I don't know about you, but I absolutely love Darby Allin and Swerve, and I feel like there is a point where I would like to see them doing something a little bit more serious because they both have it in them to pull off like a show stealer. But in this spot, just so much fun.
Yeah, you mentioned that. I mean, if you have Darby take the title from Luchasaurus next week, you've got the pay-per-view they just announced in Seattle in October. It makes perfect sense to do Darby and Swerve on that show.
Yeah, that'd be fantastic.
I mean, both of their hometown, near enough. Yeah, that's the one for me. I think that's where they're gonna go. But I mean, back to the music because I'm still thinking about the music. If you ever doubt the pockets of Tony Khan, he paid for Queen and Metallica on this show.
Yeah, that is crazy.
And if Grado was on the main show, he'd have paid for Madonna too.
I don't know. Maybe not. I thought he would have got it, but no. No, I guess not.
Grado walking out to the Big Show music. That moment, like the crowd, there was a noticeable pop when Seek and Destroy hit.
Yeah,
the lights on, just amazing moment. One of the moments from the show that will, I guess, be more memorable, or one of the most memorable moments of the show for me going forward.
It also shouldn't be forgotten that Seek and Destroy hit after that incredible video package of Sting and Darby in London. Wow. I love those every single time, and I was so worried they weren't going to have something, but of course they did.
Of course they will. I'm feeling a bit of like Swerve Strickland needs his justice because the coffin wasn't shut. His dreadlock was hanging out at the
back. They'll use that. They'll use that in the feud.
Yeah.
I suppose we can carry on talking about music because everyone was saying, wait, Fozzy are going to do a concert at All In. I was like, he's just going to play Judas.
Well, yeah.
And I didn't expect him to walk out and sing Judas. I thought he might sing it and then halfway through make the walk, not just walk to the ramp singing, which was very strange.
Yeah. I mean, I guess you're the music guy, like we said. So what are your thoughts on Fozzy? Because they're a bit yeah.
Yeah,
what are your thoughts on Fozzy?
I've seen Fozzy live a few times.
Yeah. I've seen him a couple of times.
Yeah,
They get
and
hate because of Jericho, but I don't mind Fozzy. I'll be honest. I'm real. I'm be real here.
I'm not that into it, but I obviously love Chris Jericho, and he
Yeah.
makes everything fun.
Yeah.
And Judas is legitimately an all-time wrestling song.
Great
Like,
song. Great
and
song.
I don't know how he's managed to pull that off so successfully. Where it like I know that I saw people complaining about the fact that Fozzy were gonna play there, and I was like, that's not that makes total sense to me. I'm
Yeah.
surprised that he is able to do that, and like most people, I say most people go with it. The whole crowd sings along, like no
Yeah.
matter where he walks out. And so having him play at Wembley, it made perfect sense, and I'm sure it was a lovely moment for him. But I thought he would get to like enjoy it a little bit more than climbing through the ropes while singing. But
Yeah. I mean, several months ago, when after they announced the show and they announced that Fozzy were going to be playing on the Friday in Kentish Town, kind of like you can see where it's going there. I kind of figured they would do something. It's funny hearing people complaining about having Fozzy live when it's like you sing Judas every week.
yeah, exactly. Like
Yeah.
it's just there's a few other people on the stage with him.
Yeah. But now he's going to run with Fozzy of Sold Out Wembley Stadium. That's going to be his
Oh,
new thing.
absolutely.
And of course, he went with the old Freddie Mercury call and repeat as well, because of course he did.
Yeah. I feel like we should stay briefly on entrances because another one of the moments that will always stick with me was Will Ospreay's entrance. Just to see him get that moment, and also like not only get that moment, but to be late enough in the card for where it's all dark and everyone's dialed in, and for it to be treated like such a big deal. That was my only worry when him and Jericho got announced. Is this match going to get a little bit buried under the weight of how many matches there are? But it felt like one of the big deals, which I was so happy to see that. And also, I think this match exceeded my expectations. Not that I expected Will Ospreay to have a bad match with anybody, but I was really impressed by Jericho, and I've been really bored by Jericho for quite some time. But I thought this was the best Jericho I've seen in quite a while.
Yeah, definitely. You could tell from the promo on Wednesday that he was up for this one.
Mm.
And when Jericho's up for it, it's usually pretty great, no matter who he's got around him. Yeah. I mean, if this is an indicator of what Will Ospreay is going to do in 6 months when his contract comes up, I don't know what is.
It has to happen.
It's happening.
After I assumed that was like part of it of like, look, like this is what you can do every few months if you sign with us. It's a little bit like, okay, look, we've given you this incredible moment, now come and do it all the time. And I mean, again, there was never any doubt that Will Ospreay wasn't gonna perform incredibly, but like it was like there is no room for, is he ready to do shows this big and things like that. Like it was just, well, obviously he has done huge shows with New Japan, but like how will the UK crowd respond to somebody who has wrestled indies and in Japan for the majority of his career?
Yeah, it's tough to predict on a show of this magnitude how someone, like a New Japan guy or someone who's not necessarily mainstream is going to be received, because if for most of these fans are just AEW fans, they'll have only seen Ospreay a couple of times, right? So but yeah, he did get treated like a legit superstar. The crowd treated him like that as well. I mean, you can hear a bit of singing of his song, the whole 9 yards. So I think, I mean, this was a real big moment for Ospreay, as you can imagine. And the match was phenomenal, coming off a great match with Shingo the night before that I was lucky enough to get done for.
Yeah. The Acclaimed and Billy Gunn versus the House of Black. I really needed to take a break at some point during this run of matches, and I couldn't because I love the Acclaimed and I love the House of Black. And so it was really difficult to make it through all of these matches. Like this run of matches for me was tough to find any time for a break.
Mhm.
And I love both of these teams, but it did feel like a match that I have seen 10 times.
Yeah. I mean, they've obviously wrestled each other a few times now, it feels like. I mean, and it was definitely kind of, in between these big, important singles matches, this was the cool down match, kind of. But then, in saying that, obviously the Acclaimed are popular, the House of Black are popular. And obviously it's this big crowning moment for the Acclaimed with, obviously, the celebrations afterwards. So it was a big moment, and this was a big part of the show. Obviously, the Acclaimed, very popular. A lot of Acclaimed signs, a lot of Acclaimed foam fingers were sold, I noticed.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was kind of that buffer between the Osprey match and the main event, which was needed, but at the same time, it was obviously important in its own right.
Yeah, that's what I was surprised by that. Like, I know that the Acclaimed are insanely popular, and whilst they haven't been like super active of late, just walking around Wembley, you could see how like that popularity hasn't dipped like at all. So I guess it makes sense in that regard, but to have it sandwiched in between those big singles matches, I was just surprised that it was such a big moment for the Acclaimed, and that it did feel like a big moment when it happened, but I just didn't see that coming at all. I mean, I know that there was the whole Billy Gunn retiring and then coming back. So I got that there would be more stakes on it because of that. But yeah, I feel like they really built this up as a big moment, even though it felt a bit like a last minute. It wasn't a last minute because House of Black and McClain have been feuding for ages, but it just I didn't see this being the payoff for that, and it ended up being it because the House of Black gave them the titles when they left the ring, and I was a bit like, oh, is this the end of this feud?
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I mean, I assumed that Acclaim were going to win this match, but I mean, I thought they might have done something next week as well. Because now at this point, what do you do with the House of Black on All Out? Do you just not use these guys on that show? Or it's an interesting one. Obviously, the crux with the House of Black is that in an outdoors show, you do kind of have to have them on late.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's not quite the same if it's sunny and the House of Black are making their entrance. And obviously, a big part of it was the lantern. We had the lights on in the crowd, so that's when they obviously did the Bray tribute as well. So that was really cool. And as a match, nothing special. Obviously, the big moment, I guess, was Julia Hart getting the scissor leg drop early on in the match to kind of write her out. But yeah, as a match, wasn't anything particularly spectacular. Just about par for these guys, but it was a good match. And obviously the bigger story was the moment. Obviously, you had these guys celebrating some of the most popular guys, because I saw Bowens on Saturday, kind of just out and about in Wembley. He was taking a lot of pictures with guys. Yeah. So the Acclaimed are very, very popular. So getting them this moment in front of 80,000 people, I think, was big.
Yeah. So the main event, a strange one to come out when we're talking about expectations, because although I didn't necessarily get an outcome that I expected, this match had both the storytelling like quality and the just actual quality of the match as a whole that I expected, which was a very high bar. But I didn't have I've never had any doubts that either of these guys is gonna produce a main event where like you're immediately like, oh well, that was one of the best matches of the night. Like that was never a possibility in my mind. So I wasn't like, oh my god, that was better than I thought. But the storytelling did take some turns that I didn't expect, which I would say meant it probably exceeded my expectations, just because I felt like I had it somewhat sussed out, not like specifics, but I had a feeling of the kind of beats they were going to hit, and they hit a fair few that I didn't see coming, which I think the crowd in general was bought into that. It didn't seem like I feel like with the whole, like I said, it towards the end there was some sitcom wrestling in there, which I absolutely adored. And I think it just speaks to how good this story has been, and also the in-ring work of both men. That like the whole crowd was eating out the palm of their hands, especially for the last when they stopped it with the draw. From that point on, it felt like it went up another gear. But the whole thing is absolutely fantastic. Like,
yeah, I would echo pretty much everything you just said there. Wasn't what I expected, and some of the stuff they did was a risk of being a tad overbooked, but I don't think it got there. You mentioned the sitcom stuff. That's, I guess, expected when you look at some of the stuff they've been doing. You kind of expected that a little bit of that would come into it. But all in all, I thought this was a fantastic match.
Yeah. And again, not the note that I expected the show to end on.
Yeah. I mean, I think everyone figured there was a turn coming one way or the other, right?
Yeah. And you know what? Like, I think that when we spoke earlier about the lack of like singles matches and stuff like that, because you've got All Out coming up, I feel like there is a risk by not having one of them turn that people say, I suppose a little bit to compare it to WWE, where a lot of people have got with the Bloodline now, where it's like, yeah, I love the Bloodline story, but like something needs to happen now. Like you can't just chop and change the path we're going down slightly. Like something needs to shift. And so I feel like there is a danger in the way they put that match of people saying nothing big enough happened. But it speaks to, again, how good the match was and how good the build has been, that like I don't care. Have them be best friends for at least, the next few weeks, and we'll see where that goes. And honestly, from now, I have no idea what the next like few steps look like. Do they just keep defending the tag belts? Do they have another match? I don't know where this goes from here, which is so exciting, and I didn't expect that one bit. I felt like it would be like, okay, at the end of All In, we would go, okay, this is what's going to happen from here, and it would have been exciting because they're both amazing and they work together in like so perfectly each time, but completely subverted where I thought that was going.
Yeah, I agree on all of that. I obviously love the storyline. I think everyone does. The stuff they've been doing is just great, but this is the most intrigued I've been with the storyline because, like you said, genuinely don't know which way they're going to go with it. It's interesting with the tag titles how that dynamic now comes into it. Obviously, you've got Roddy Strong in the background, always being the most unlikable person ever, which seems to be his character. But no, it's an interesting one. All Out is going to be interesting as well because MJF's story is that he's in Paris, so it seems like he's not going to be on that show. So, do they just leave the storyline alone on that show, which I think would be a mistake? But I'm not sure where the storyline goes from here, and that's a good place to be.
Yeah, I'm fortunate that we're not doing like, if we were doing these every week, we then after the show review have to review how it impacts All Out, and I have no idea what All Out is going to look like. Like, because if you're not going to have MJF on the show, who is your main event? Is Punk on the show? Like,
who knows at this point?
Are FTR on the show? Like, there's so many questions going into that. You've blown off the Sting and Darby feud somewhat. I think, like you said, I think if Darby beats Luchasaurus, then that goes on from there. But that takes that out of the picture somewhat. I suppose I don't know. I guess Swerve will come back into the picture fairly soon, but I don't know. I have no idea what All Out looks like now.
Yeah,
I know that we have Miro and Hobbs. That's about it.
Yeah, it's a tricky position to be in, and obviously we've switched the conversation a little bit now to All Out. But It's a tricky situation for that show, with obviously so many of the big stars needing to be on this Wembley show, and them having such a big roster that they could perceivably do 2 shows with completely different rosters. But when you look at that All Out card at the minute, is that a show that, if you say, if we're in America, you're gonna put your hand in your pocket and pay $50 for?
I mean, they've never had a show that's had this much impacting it. Like every pay-per-view, you get all of the big storylines.
Yeah.
So it just feels weird to have this. I can't remember anything like it where you're like, I legitimately don't know what this card is a week away.
Let's have a look. I'll pull up, see what's on there. Stall for a second.
Yeah, I suppose the only final thing I'm going to touch on with All In is with you having gone to the recent WWE shows, which from watching at home seemed like they had an incredible atmosphere, and just fantastic to see things like that happening really in general. So one of the things I loved about being in Wembley for All In was there was no like tribalism at all throughout the whole time. Everyone was having a good time, and that was the main thing. But how did All In as a show match up to the recent WWE ones? Like, because the biggest selling point that they were using throughout the whole thing was, this is not a gimmick, this is the biggest wrestling event of all time. Like, did it feel different enough to you?
I think purely because of the spectacle, yeah, it did. You know, you've got Wembley, you've got 80,000 people. But, you know, Money in the Bank, I thoroughly enjoyed the live experience of that show too. And it was different because obviously it's more tightly packed, right? It's in the O2. So obviously the crowd, it's on top of the action more. It feels more of an intense atmosphere because, you know, it's under the roof. It's, you know, so atmosphere wise, the Money in the Bank show might have been better purely because, you know, it's under the roof. It's like, yeah. Whereas with Wembley, you know, a lot of the sound gets sucked into the air. It's kind of, when you got such a big crowd, it's tough to kind of be on the same wavelength to a section on the other side of the crowd. So like we might have heard completely different chants.
There was multiple times I could hear 2 different chants.
Yeah,
that, like people were getting mixed up. Yeah.
Did the Wheeler's Got a Gun chant make it to your section?
No, it did not.
It
no, there were a few boos, but no chance. Which is a strange reality that we live in.
No, I think it's certainly easier in terms of chanting when you're a bit lower down, when you're closer to the action. You feel more a part of it as opposed to sitting up in the gods. You notice that at the O2 as well. But no, I think spectacle wise, for the moment that All In was, it did feel bigger than both of those recent WWE pay-per-views. Clash at the Castle was like a real great moment, but you know, it didn't have the pyro. It was Cardiff, not London, so there wasn't as much going on around like the whole city. It was a smaller crowd, slightly or significantly. So that was a great show. Money in the Bank was a great show, but I think in terms of just the all-round package, All In pips it.
I feel like that that summarizes the expectations as well, like pretty well. In that, I mean, obviously we've gone match by match, and I would be interested to hear someone's take who doesn't watch AEW or hasn't beforehand, but saw how big the show was and things like that, and then wanted to tune in and watch it, because I feel like this didn't leave me surprised at all because of watching every other AEW pay-per-view. Like, this just felt like a bigger, like in terms of the crowd and scale, AEW pay-per-view. And so I feel like I knew what to expect from like pretty much everything I saw. And that didn't disappoint me at all, because that's what I signed up for and that's what I was excited to see. And so I feel like they did they've already announced the second one. So I mean, there's no debating that it went well. It went so well that Tony Khan could afford to pay for Metallica and Queen. So
massive success all around. You going to be heading there next year again, Kyle?
I think so.
Yeah.
I can't imagine not. doing it.
I may have already booked the hotel.
Damn. All right. Well,
you gotta get in before the prices go up, before they realize there's a show going on.
You know what? I might consider doing it as well, so that I can get to any of the shows that happen on the weekend, instead of traveling up.
Retro, they're probably going to run Copper Box again. Like we touched on earlier, you might have a Collision on the Saturday. You could even get a Dynamite on the Wednesday. Who knows? There's going to be, I think, more going on next year. And obviously, with a year to kind of plan it, you're probably going to get more fans coming from internationally as well. So, and there was a lot of international fans for this one. So I know I went to a Q&A on Saturday with Brian Alvarez and Dave Meltzer. Guy next to me flew in for this show from Australia.
Damn.
Yeah. He flew in Thursday, flying out Tuesday, came for this show. And like at that Q&A, they said, raise your hand if you're from out of the UK or outside of England. Like about half of the room raised their hand. So yeah, there was a lot of people who traveled for this show, and I think with the years build, with the success of the show, you might not get as many people coming from different parts of England, because presumably it's not the first show. They might have come and hit some other markets in that time. They might have come and done a show in Manchester, for example. It's a year away, so you might not get quite as much of a traveling crowd from the UK, but I think you're still gonna, with the success, the magnitude of this show, I think you're still going to hit the international market flying in for the show next year, which is probably, they want to make this show a destination.
I definitely think that it went very well for them, obviously, and I am excited to see what changes between now and then, because, man, if you look at where we were at with AEW a year ago, things were very different, so it'll be very interesting.
You can't even begin to predict what we're going to see on that show.
Yeah. The only other thing I'm going to mention, because I didn't mention it earlier, the pop when they showed Mercedes Moné.
Yeah,
fantastic. That was a brilliant moment that I had a feeling was probably going to happen, but it was like I don't want to jinx it by thinking about it too much.
Well, she had posted pictures earlier in the day from London. And I kind of assumed that was just her being a troll, because she can be like that, it seems. Yeah. But no, she was there. And if I was going to predict one thing for next year's show, I think she will be wrestling on there.
Yeah, I think so too. That'll be cool. All right, well, that is the roundup for AEW All In. If you went to the show, then let us know whether it lived up to your expectations as well, I guess, and whether you're going to go to the next one. Because I will probably start thinking about it already.
I don't think there's going to be many people who went to this show and they're like, nah, you're right, I won't go next year.
Yeah, agreed. Good times.